Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I know it's a beautiful evening, so thanks for coming here to learn a bit about these 5 mistakes that startups make with their branding. So my name is Cara Bendon and I'm a branding consultant. So I'm guessing all of you have, maybe are you all entrepreneurs, or you have an interest in becoming one? Yeah? Okay, great. So this talk is just to do with the brand perspective. There's a whole load of other things that can go wrong, obviously, I'm sure you'll know. But this is from my experience working with startups and small businesses over the last few years. So I'll start by telling you a bit about who's talking to you tonight. Because I'm quite a visual person, I decided that I would use pictures to tell my story. So 10 years ago, I started my career working in advertising. It was 2008, the height of the recession, and it was near impossible to get a job, but I was really lucky, and I found myself working in a very small digital agency in Camden. One of my first clients was Malmaison Hotels, which is fantastic fun because it's a luxury boutique hotel, and they have I don't know if you know them, but they have a really sort of cheeky tone of voice. So that was really fun to kind of cut my teeth on. And then I actually worked on several other hotel chains when I was there. Then just so I didn't become too hotel-y, I started working on Super Nanny. But with the really cool things, I was learning fast actually, because it was that time, many industries were really suffering, but advertising and marketing is one of the first things to go when budgets cut. So there was a huge amount of pressure within the industry, and the budgets were being halved for projects. A lot of clients were taking the work in-house, and the competition was incredibly fierce for anybody who was left in the game. What this meant is that within 2 years, as a 23-year-old, I had gone from being the most junior member of staff, fresh out of uni, to running a team with 5 beneath me. And while that looks great on paper, the truth is I didn't know what I was doing. I still needed to learn a lot. So I decided to move to a bigger agency, and I got to work in one of the UK's top advertising agencies on some really cool projects, including like making TV ads and doing press ads and things like that. And my client there was The Times. And I'm not sure if you guys remember, but The Times was the first media newspaper to start charging for access to their website. Don't know if you guys knew that or remembered that, but at the time it was met with a huge amount of sort of disfavour, let's put it that way, and nobody thought it would work. It was a challenge, but I was part of the team that managed to get 100,000 paid digital subscribers for The Times in their first year. But with all that amazing experience and working on these cool projects, the other side of it was the sort of 13, 14-hour days, the eating lunch and dinner on the fly, never really seeing friends and family, and just the pressure was incredibly immense. I found myself finding that I was, despite the fact that everyone told me I had a really great job, I wasn't happy. And it started to take its toll on my health. My friends weren't seeing me much, so we'd all book a restaurant for dinner, and then they'd say, oh, you know, just make it for 4, Cara definitely won't come. And so, you know, that started to happen. So I actually found myself in hospital a few times. It was one thing after another. I got a chest infection, then a throat infection, then I was diagnosed with asthma, and then my immune system just took a huge hit. And really, I was only 24 and I didn't know why this was happening, and it really made me think very differently about things. So I decided, well, you know, I never took that gap year that everyone did, so I'm going to go traveling. So here was me in Thailand, starting my trip, you know, all the cliches. But sadly, I didn't really get very far into that trip. Within 4 days of me arriving, I got a call from my mum, who told me that my dad had passed away. Very suddenly, I hadn't known he was ill. He had been diagnosed with cancer and died within 6 weeks of the diagnosis. And I'm not saying this to be morose, but I'm saying this because for me, it was a very defining moment. When I went from wanting to be an employee with a career that looked great on LinkedIn and I could tell my family about, to a different set of priorities where I wanted to take ownership for my own work. I wanted to work for myself. I remember when I worked in ad agencies, they were all generally the names of the partners. And I remember saying to my mum, one day I want to work and I want the front door to say my name and not somebody else's. So I decided I would set up my own business, like you guys. So at the time, my biggest passion was photography. And I had some paying clients and I had won a couple of competitions. So I thought, this is encouraging, this seems legitimate. So I decided I'd set up my business with the help of the Prince's Trust. And when I was there, I was surrounded by other people who were setting up their businesses, much like yourselves. And it was crazy how much I noticed people not understanding how to market themselves effectively. And it made me really sad when I saw some of the other people who were on my Prince's Trust program being ripped off or sort of blinded by science by people in the industry who were like ripping them off for a website, or that they'd ordered a load of leaflets, but they'd put like a date on them, so they had to just mulch them after. And they were just really obvious things to me, and I just suddenly realized, these things aren't obvious to everyone. And then ensued a long sort of battle of wills in my head, because I definitely didn't want to go back to advertising and marketing, because for me, I'd had a really bad experience. And one day I was swimming. I don't know if any of you guys do something for headspace, like meditate or yoga or go running. So for me, swimming is the one. And I was swimming and I suddenly thought, my dad grew up with no money and he was a Yorkshireman. So we always bought the cheapest of anything possible. I'd never felt that I'd been particularly drawn to any brands. We'd always looked for value over a name. And then I thought, actually, Listerine. He always bought Listerine. I know it's a strange thing to suddenly think when you're swimming, but I just thought, that's really strange, because he seemed to be such a sort of rational, practical person, but he always buys Listerine. And so I always buy Listerine because I think it does a good job. And he always bought me a Denman hairbrush when I was a little girl. And so I've always thought Denman hairbrushes are the best hairbrushes. And I still buy Vanish for stain remover. And it suddenly got me thinking, I'm sure you guys all have various relationships with brands yourself. And I started thinking, this is really fascinating, actually, how it's one step away from the advertising. Before that, it's the loyalty that somebody has to a brand that's really psychologically interesting to me. And I'm going to work with small businesses and help them create that sort of loyalty that these really well-known heritage brands have. So that's when I decided to set up a branding consultancy. So I was very lucky as well that I passed through the Prince's Trust program, was in business a couple of years, and then they invited me back as a success story to be a young ambassador for the Prince's Trust. So I can also tell you about Prince's Trust programs if any of you guys are interested. It's not a sales thing, they're a fantastic charity. But they are a really fantastic charity, and I think one of the things I like most about the Prince's Trust is that they have an enterprise program. And that's been running, I think, about 7 years. So they were maybe one of the first to realize that employment isn't the only route, because they specialize in people who are maybe in difficult situations, young people. And so I think it's fantastic. They're really enabling a lot of young people into business. So these days I run an agency, like I said. I work with a small team I work with 4 different graphic designers and 2 web developers, and they're all freelancers, so it works, it's sort of a collaborative, but I'm always there, and I oversee all the projects. And we've worked on over 30 brands or brand refreshes, and I've been lucky enough to be called up every now and then by the press for comment on branding matters. So now you know a bit about me, we can talk about startups and the mistakes that they make. So 3 new startups launch every second globally. And I'm sure that you are well versed in the statistic below that only 10% of them survive their first few years. And when I started researching this talk, I found a lot of sort of doom and gloom when it comes to startups. You know, I always had the figure in my head of like 1 in 3 startups fail, and then, you know, it was whether they survived the first year, the second year, or run the whole distance. And I think, yes, that is true, but the ones that stick around, startups now more than ever play such a vital role in our lives. So in the time this slide's been up, I'd say about 35 new startups have launched globally. But who knows the ones that will be such a big part of our life. So these days, whether you use some or all of them, I don't think we couldn't have the lifestyle we have if it weren't for these businesses that are all incredibly new. So having worked with startups and smaller businesses, these are specifically the branding problems that I most commonly see from them. So don't worry, we're going to go through them. But first of all is naming. Second is color. Third is that they're forgettable. The fourth is that they look generic. And the fifth is that they rush their branding. By the way, if you want to, the Slido hashtag is on here if you want to ask your questions. And that's my handle if you also want to ask me any questions after. Oh, sorry, we've timed out. Is Alex around? Oh, sorry, we're going on. You guys are getting a spoiler. There we are. Sorry. Right. Okay. So we start with naming. So naming universally, whether you're a startup or whether you are in any kind of line of business, is incredibly difficult. Hands up if you guys have named a business. Right. Well done. Well done. Hands up if you struggled naming your business. Yeah, right, exactly. It's so difficult to find something that is available, unique, doesn't have any copyright infringement, that you don't go off within 24 hours, that's catchy. It's a minefield. But these are the 3 sort of specific hang-ups that I keep seeing with startups. Naming based on a domain availability. This is a huge pet hate. So I remember I've come to so many consultations with startups or meetings with them, and we've sort of brainstormed, and I've said, it sounds like a great idea, so what are you going to call it? And then they just pull up this Google Doc where they have a list of domains that are available and potential other extensions that they want to run by me. And I'm like, oh, it looks catchy, So first of all, though, my heart sinks, because if you're coming from a domain availability, you are always working backwards. So let's face it, by now, all of those short, lovely, tasty, catchy URLs .com have gone. And that is not the end of the world. Yes, it would be amazing if you could get oneword.com, but unless you make up that word, it's not really going to happen. And I suggest that you just don't waste energy on it. The second thing that I find all the time is wanting a verb name. So like Google. The amount of people that say to me, I just want a catchy name, something like Google. Yeah, me too. So I'll talk a bit about that, but basically, in a nutshell, Google is a made-up word. It isn't a verb. It's just become a verb because of the colloquialism, because of its popularity. And the third thing is limiting your growth with a really prescriptive name. So I'll go through them in more detail. So in terms of the domains, one thing, I thought I would just have a look out there, because there are so many websites or brands, and you'd be surprised by the domain they actually use. So eat.com is owned by Hellmann's, and it's really funny because as a small business owner, you're taught, you think you have to have the .co.uk and the .com. And they have the .co.uk, but they don't have the .com. So it just proves that actually, your business can still be a success. It is obviously ideal if you get both of those, but it really is not a deal breaker. And it's kind of fairly obvious when you go to .com, that you're on a Hellmann's page, not an Eat one. Tinder started on gotinder.com, and they still use that domain to this day. They use tinder.com as their main one, but gotinder.com is actually where all the information is hosted, and they still use it for redirects. I'm not going to pronounce that, but Buffer started out without any vowels. And then they went to Buffer App, which is a really good option. You know, join and then the name of your company, we are, and the name of your company, and then, you know, those are all good viable options, as well as .co and .io. You know, they're really useful. And it wasn't until 5 years later that they actually got buffer.com. And Twitter were a bit faster with getting the .com, but actually they completely started out with a text language version of their domain name, and then moved on to having the .com. And they had to, I can't remember the sum of money. It wasn't like astronomical, but they did have to buy it from a bird watcher, which is quite amusing. So basically, the point I'm saying is, when you're brainstorming names, if there's, you know, going for a domain search can be a really quick way to rule things out, but I don't think it should be. I think if it's a strong name, keep it on the table. Obviously, if there's nothing with the we are or the join or join us or whatever it might be, then maybe that's different. But don't just immediately rule it out because the .com isn't available. Okay, so back to that Google. So verb names, it was quite funny because Google, Shazam, WhatsApp, Instagram, and Airbnb. Just Airbnb it. Or I'll WhatsApp it to you. We use them as verbs, but those are not intrinsically verbs in any way. So I'm not, you know, obviously I can understand why it's so good, and it is great if you can find something that has a sort of latch or a sound to it like that. But if you're focusing on trying to look for a verb, I can guarantee you're just going to come up with something that, you know, isn't really going to catch on. Like, I think the point of all these three things is that when I chat with a startup and they say, well, that domain isn't available. Well, we want it to sound catchy like a verb, you know, or the third thing that I'll come to in a minute. Straight away, I just feel that they're missing the mark creatively. So here are some examples of businesses that do just dandy without having a verb name. And again, it's very transferable, because you might say, you know, oh, I'll Uber it, but like, again, that's not a verb, it's just the usage. So really, obviously it's the dream, but dream big. If you guys can make your startups that popular, that indispensable for people, then they will become verbs, whatever you name them. So the third point is with limiting names. So Poundland at the moment are in administration. And that is possibly as well because of the wider problem that the UK high street is facing at the moment. But in the last few years, who's been in a Poundland and noticed things that were more than a pound? Right, okay, and it's because they're trying to diversify their business. They're trying to make ends meet, and you get it. But it's always a bit strange the first time you pick up something, get to the till, and they say, oh, that's £3, and you're like, oh, what? Oh, I didn't realize. And I think it's, if you went to somewhere and, you know, if you were in Superdrug and you bought the hay fever tablets and they were £3, you wouldn't think twice, but it's the expectation that you're coming in at a certain level. And while Poundland's model has worked quite well for them, it shows the limitation of it. Now they're facing problems that there's not much space they can grow in. We Buy Any Car, so some good and bad examples here. We Buy Any Car doing great because it's got full brand awareness, it's really clear. I mean, weirdly, they still market with the .com, which feels a bit retro to me, but it means that nobody forgets it. And if you want to sell your car, you know, chances are you're going to think of it. So they're doing a pretty good job in terms of their brand awareness. So I put them up here because if they suddenly wanted to start buying camper vans or caravans, you know, they'd start facing a little bit of problems. So, though I checked with them and they really are like pretty happy in their field and owning it, so good on them. But here's a couple that I made up here. But like, say if there was a site called Date London and the whole idea was that, you know, I don't know, you go around London landmarks and meet people to date or something like that, you'd straight away, if you'd been naming the brand that, you are limiting it immediately. So this actually doesn't happen as much for sort of tech startups, but it happens a lot for service businesses or anything else. And it's sort of a rookie error. Yeah, I mean, most of you guys probably aren't in like beauty, but I've seen it so many times with beauty, especially with salons, that they'll name themselves after a location, and it really just doesn't allow for that expansion. And again, the fries guys. So does what it says on the tin. If you want fries, you'll probably trust the fries guys. But what if they suddenly want to start doing more things? You know, if they get health conscious and do salads, or if they do chicken or hamburgers, you know, basically straight away your expectation is that they're the fry guys. So just something to think about. Here are some examples of brands that are wide open. They could do anything, and they do. So Virgin's an excellent example, because obviously, I mean, as a naming choice, it's actually kind of a bit weird, but it's so broad and it's so unspecific that it allows them to do all the ventures they have. So, you know, the Virgin Trains, Virgin Hot Air Balloons, Virgin Planes, you know, Virgin Internet, you know. So basically, there's nothing they're limiting themselves against. Again, with Apple, their brand name really says very little. And there's something to be said for this. So a lot of brands are trying to find a name that says what they do, and that is not necessary. You can, I mean, a lot of the examples we've looked at, aside from these guys here, you know, the Shazams, the Ubers, their names are often abstract, or they're compounded words, they're made up words, or they're words that are used out of context slightly differently. And if you're doing that, as long as you match it up with a good, I would call it a positioning statement. I say that rather than a tagline, because I don't think every brand has to have a tagline, but as soon as somebody comes onto your social media or your app or your website, then if you have a name that doesn't describe what you do or doesn't give a hint towards it, then make sure you have a strong, short statement that really clearly says what you do. And then, you know, you're on your way to being a more strong brand. Okay. So this is a really interesting one. I'm going to surprise you with a statistic here, but up to 85% of a first impression is made up from just looking at the color. So your brain reads color, and then it will read form. So if it's sort of like a round thing, it will read sort of that it's blue, and then it's round, and then it will read the text. So this can be quite useful for startups. So here we are. I have put these examples up here, not to shame them in any way, and actually their logos, you know, aren't necessarily bad or good. You know, I may have different opinions on them, but I put them up here purely because of the use of color. So actually, you know, you might think some of these actually look quite good. They look quite professional, they look quite legit, but what's coming through is they're all using color too. And some of them, like Tradeshift and Raybox, have, you know, they have like clear brand colors that you can pull out, and the same with Shuttle. But the problem is, overall, even you can see on this page that they sort of, some of them look a bit too samey. And especially with like the Conduit or Kazaa, they're using a lot of colors and no one color really stands out. That's fine if you're an established business, because you've been creating brand awareness for however many years. But if you're a startup, you've got to sort of use what you've got in your back pocket. And what you've got in your back pocket is the science that people read color before they read anything else. So if you go out with one strong color, that would be my top tip for you guys, you know, to keep everything in one color to begin with. That doesn't mean, you know, as your brand grows and your business grows, you can introduce others, or at least one main brand color, so that, you know, if I say to you Spotify, what color do you say? Excellent. Skype? Excellent. Right. Okay. Bumble? Yellow. Yeah. Okay. Few people on the dating scene. They're like, yeah, Coca-Cola, red, etc., etc. So they're very iconic, and we can think about them without really having to, you know, think much. And so you're sort of using that psychology when you start up. So I'll give you a few examples that I think are doing quite well. So I think all of these brands are doing really well because they're using color in a really clean and really powerful way. If I was to go on any of their websites, or what I would hope at least, is that they've pulled through the color well enough that I can't help but see this color through it. Almost if you're on the tube and you're commuting home and there are a million tube ads contending for your attention, you couldn't help but see the brand even if you were not paying attention. That's what you should sort of strive for when you're starting up. Something else I really, really like about these, actually, red gets used a lot. And red, blue, and green all get used huge amounts. But something you might feel is, all the big colors are taken, so which color do you go for, right? And I know a few years ago anyway, everyone was saying, in tech it was all about blue, it had to be blue, and then it was blue and green, and then it was, oh God, we don't want to be blue and green, we want to stand out. So just a couple of points that I think are quite useful about color here. First of all, if your neighbors are all one color, you can stand out immediately by picking a color that does not fall part of the family. So if everything is blue and green, then go for something completely different. Go for a pink, why not? And the other thing is, there are thousands of colors in the world. Everything comes from the three basic colors of red, yellow, and blue. So, it's just the way you mix them, it's just the particular shade. So what I like especially is for Iterate, that is, I think it was a survey app or something like that, and they've used this color that for me reminds me of the Milka chocolate bars. And then when I think about it, it reminds me of Cadbury's. And then I think, oh, purple's used a lot in confectionery that's maybe aimed at women. And it's interesting that they've used that color, because by using that color here, actually on my screen it comes across a bit bluer, but it is a sort of lilac. By using that color within their marketplace, they really caught my eye. I was looking for things to put on my slide, and I was like, I really like that. It was really, really crisp and clean, and it basically, subliminally, it made me take note because it looked different. And also, I don't see that shade used very much. Apart from Milka, I don't see it in any other brands. So I think that's quite interesting. The same with Patron, that's sort of like a corally peach. I don't see that color in branding very often, and especially with the white and really clean. And that Lyft, which is like the American Uber, has used like hot pink. I think is great. It's completely outside of the norm for that industry. Okay, so this is an interesting thing. I actually wrote a blog piece about this a while back. So traditionally, if you think about takeout, especially, most takeout, you'd be bombarded with these sort of colors. Black, red, and yellow, and especially within pizza takeout and burgers and stuff like that. And so Just Eat and Hungry House were already on the market as delivery services. And then in 2013, Deliveroo came along, and they decided, we're mint. We're going to be really, really fresh, zesty turquoise mint. And as well, they completely bucked the image because, they had like cyclists rather than like motorbikes. And, for not going to go into sort of the ethics of Deliveroo right now, but just visually, they are so disruptive. They stand out a mile. And, their ethos sort of was different as well because the food was from local places, or more about quality. The photography styles on the app are noticeably better than in other takeout services. So I thought they were a really nice example as well. So here you are, guys. There's 1,867 shades that Pantone has recorded. So you have so many options. So if you, don't feel that you can't go for the color you love just because a competitor does. Just think a bit more creatively. Okay, so forgettable. Obviously, you're like, well, no startup wants to be forgettable, but there's sort of simple ways that one thing that I see is that you're a small business and you are doing it on a bootstrap, but you need to think bigger, as in you need to think, if you had an advertising budget, what would you do? So I work in branding, but I always think this way. So if I meet with an entrepreneur or a group of startups, and I'll talk to the founders, and they're saying something, or they're about to launch something, I'm straight away like visualizing what the ad would be like. And I know that I'm an exception, but just try and think, somebody's given you £250,000 and you get to do a TV ad and a tube ad. You know, what's it look like? The reason I'm saying that is because when you start thinking like that, you make big brand decisions. What is our strapline? What's the image we want to put out there into the world? Do we use a jingle or don't we? You know, do we show our interface or do we show the benefit? And those are the kind of things that show consideration. And you know, at the start I showed you that list of all the apps that we use on a daily basis or that touch our lives, and they're successful because they found their way into our routines. So whatever your app is, you know, basically if you can stop people and make them think, oh, that would make my life better, then you're onto a winner, rather than coming from a place of, hey, look at my app, it's new. So it's sort of coming from the audience point of view, and it helps you get perspective and do that. So one thing I'll say is I've put up these because I was searching, and I should have photographed more on the tube, because every time I'm on the tube I see so many things, and I'll always photograph good things, but I realize I'm never really photographing the bad. And most of the tube ads, you know, hair loss ads aside, there's quite a lot that are just really dull and repetitive. You see it day in, day out. I put up these AXA ads because they're not terrible, but they're not great. They're just incredibly okay. And AXA are an incredibly successful insurance broker and company, so they can do that, and I'm sure they'll probably still get results. You know, this is quite a direct response campaign. I'm sure they will still work. But when you're a startup, you need to get people to, you know, go to your website or download your app. You need people to remember your name and choose to take action, and that is a lot more than bigger companies, where sometimes their ads only need to remind people to do something. So the reason I put these on here is because, well, in the case of the big outdoor ads, I mean, it's a very, it's not a catchy headline at all. It's got generic stock clicking images of different trades. It doesn't really garner much sort of trust. It doesn't, it's not relatable to me. And then it's also got quite a lot of copy. So, and also it's an outside ad, and it's got a phone number on it. But basically, it was the main reason was that it just doesn't really pull me in. There's nothing that really grabs my attention. And the same with this one. It's, you know, it's nice that they are using a sort of profile, but it's a bit worn out, this practice of, you know, pretend it's a customer, have a quote over the top, you know, and then have a call to action. Another one I came across was this, which is like a credit score app. In fairness, I think this is a still, but straight away I was just like, oh, it's an app with charts of money and a gradient, and I'm sure I wouldn't remember the name if I, you know, had to tell somebody. It just doesn't really, for me, it's not necessarily that the visuals are bad. They're actually really clean and nice, but it's just that it's so generic, and there are other brands out there, especially in, like, say, the credit score game, that have, you know, that are more memorable for me, because they're advertising in a different way. And also just the way it shows it is it only shows itself. It's showing the device. It's not showing me any of the benefits. So for me, it's about as interesting as tax. And here, this is a dating app, How's You, and it just looks like every single dating app in the world to me. So, yeah, just the colors, the fact it's got the pink and blue and the gender signs, it just looks like it's literally a off-the-shelf idea. And this one could get people to quit smoking. Possibly the worst, because the green's kind of coming out to me, but then there's the red on the ribbon, and then I don't know, that's the URL, which is very long, and then the interface looks incredibly dull. So I just think, you know, there was such an opportunity here, you know, to connect with the emotions of why that person wants to quit. And I know you guys are the founders, and you are thinking about building the app, and if it's not you that does the advertising, then go to somebody and find somebody. But if you are creative, you know, just think more creatively, think laterally. Instead of thinking, oh, these are the features of our app, think, this is the need of my audience, this is their pain point, or this is how I help their pain point. Or just go for something that really grabs their attention. So I really like this campaign from Nutmeg. This is their second campaign actually, but I remember seeing it around the tube, just sort of busting that stereotype of what an investor looks like. And also, it's just the layout as well. It's a really attention-grabbing headline. It's really nice and large. The rest of the copy is smaller, but there's not much of it. And then their tagline, how investing should be. It has a really nice warm tone of voice to it. So even though I don't necessarily know anything about them, I'm already quite interested because they're showing me that they have a completely different approach. It's very people-centric and more down to earth. And I like that. Though their first campaign was a little bit more disruptive. So again, back to color, you couldn't not get that their color was green. Investing without the bankers and pension ISA easy as pie. So again, these are designs. I really like the way they're designed because these are designed as outdoor ads with the small text, if you're having a long journey or so that you first read the headline and then get drawn in. But I think you should think like that for everything. If something's on social media, you've actually got less of an audience. At least on a tube carriage, people have got to commute. On social media, people could just scroll. So you should really catch attention with your headlines and your imagery. And we know what this one is? It's a still from an ad that was from a couple of years ago for Deezer. And while the ad was a bit cheesy, it was also done in a very tongue-in-cheek way. And it was just using things, so it was, so this is a geezer. So there was geezer, there was a sneezer, there was tweezer, then there was lemon squeezer or something. I can't remember, but basically it did the job. They were launching onto a very competitive market with Spotify and SoundCloud and YouTube and iTunes and all the other various services. And basically they did very well because then they made their name very memorable because of this rhyming. Also because the colors, the ads were really bright and colorful as well. I almost put Spock up here because they do a similar thing, but I strongly dislike that ad. And I think the reason that this one was better is because it had a sense of humor about it and the other just seems quite earnest. So I think it's a great opportunity to kind of convey almost what your brand is it's not just your product. You're saying, come to my party, it's fun, right? Or come over here, I'll make your life better. So if you think like an advertiser, even then your social media ads, even the first things you put out are going to come from this really confident, really thought about, creative, attention-grabbing place. And this was for TaskRabbit. So I actually really like this one. Moving sucks the life out of you. Maintain your sanity. Post the task at TaskRabbit. So these are tube and bus ads, but they're very, very simple. But what I liked about them as well is they really bucked the trend of photography. There's no photography in them at all, and we see actually a huge amount of photography in the ads that we are exposed to every day. Also, it's just really strong graphically, and it gets the message across in a fun tone of voice. So speaking of images, as a startup, I know that you're going to be using stock, and I think stock is great. I use stock. In fact, I think the image behind it is stock. But what I don't like seeing is I often see the same images in my feed, and that's when it starts to basically, if you're trying to create some authenticity or integrity about your brand, then that straight away sort of undermines it because everyone's like, oh, I've seen that picture somewhere else. So, I mean, while you could try and only shoot your own images, which is obviously preferable, I know that's not practical. So basically, I'm hopefully going to show you from my point of view how you can improve on that. Okay, so don't think for a second I'm thinking of these. But a few years ago, maybe like 10 years ago, these were everywhere in like business presentations and even on business websites and consulting websites. We've moved on from that, and that's great. Stock has really evolved. There's more diversity. The image styles are better. We have different like styles of photography, and they reflect our lives better, where we don't talk as much in sort of over-the-top dramatizations. But we have created a new set of cliches. We've got the coffee with the, the flat lay, because nobody ever goes to check an email unless they've got like their nail varnish and their planner and their like inspirational quote on their desk. And then, you know, sunsets and golden hour, and yeah, and basically there's nothing wrong with these images. They're actually very, very good photographs. It's just that it's become a little bit of a trend, and the second thing I see is the sort of disparity that somebody could use this image of the lady here, but then also use the image on the left of the glasses on the laptop and not really see that those do not feel like they are part of the same family. So here's a really good example. Treatwell is a salon discount app. They rebranded about 5 years ago from Wahanda. And they have fantastic imagery. So they have a team, they have photographers, they have an agency, but what you can see immediately what it is they have in common. So they've kind of got quirky poses, brightly colored backgrounds and walls, and then they've taken it to the next level in terms of they've always got some sort of tagline or some text over it in oversized font, and then they've also got the sort of squiggles around it. And graphically, those are quite simple things, but they bring it together. I'm sorry there aren't men on this board. They've got loads of fantastic images, and I want to show a variety, but they also are really good in terms of good diversity of facial expression and skin tone and all types of things. So it feels like a really nice set of images. They don't get tired. And very different style of imagery, but also the This Girl Can campaign, which was an excellent campaign. They did a lot of print advertising and social media advertising, and in it they use this photography. And again, so they are shooting their own images, but if I was working with a client like this, I would say, okay, that's fine. So, you know, they might think, oh, we want pictures of people doing sport. Okay, great. But then you have to think, you want pictures of people doing sport that have a narrow depth of field. So you can see behind the boxing girl here that it's out of focus. You can see here that the hands are slightly out of focus. It's soft focus. You can tell that they're also both at the same sort of level of them. It's little things like that will just sort of elevate how you're bringing together libraries of images on stock. Basically, do they look like they came from the same photographer or that they possibly could? That's what to strive for. Okay, so you have got a name, not been obsessed with the domain availability, or that it's a Google or a verb, and it's not limiting your business from growth. You sorted your colors, you're gonna choose a unique shade and go strong. You've got consistent imagery, you've got a great idea for your launch campaign, even though if it's only gonna be on social media. But now you need a logo. So the two biggest things here, I think the biggest problems that I've seen really were the previous four, but these are things I see time and time again. So first of all is not allowing enough time for the branding process. So without this sounding preachy, like please give us more time to do the project, this is actually because if you give a graphic designer a few weeks to come up with a logo, if they're a good graphic designer, I'm sure they'll do you a great job, but they can't really work backwards into your app or your website or your product. So nothing else outside of the header on your website or the header on your app or nothing's gonna be consistent. And that loyalty I talked to you about before with the Listerine and the varnish, and that is because of the deeply embedded brand journey and consistency you get. Every time you see it, it represents a promise, and you get that sort of loyalty if you thread your brand and weave it cleverly through everything you do. So actually, the best thing is if you can talk to a designer, a couple of months before you want to launch, that is a good time. Even if things are not finished, that's completely fine. Because it means that we can help you get a strong sense of identity. So branding for me is not just a logo, it's not just a tagline, it is about the language, the fonts, the colors, the imagery you use, the personality. And if we can come up with that as a collaborative effort with you, it's going to be 10 times stronger. So The other thing as well is branding a little bit early on. So if you are like struggling and you've only got a few pounds, then I think it can be tempting, obviously you want to go and get investment, and to get investment you need it to look quite established, you need it to look good, and that's where branding is really useful. But on the contrary side of that, if you take something, branding can it can conceal some of the lumps in the journey. And if your startup, if your product or your idea isn't really strong enough yet, you might be branding it a bit early. You might be branding the wrong version of it or the wrong idea altogether. So what I think is best is that you get enough, just the same as you would in your business, get a minimum amount of branding done, and then get investment, because if it's just seed investment, it doesn't have to be all the rounds, but you need validation that the idea is good, and investment is a very good solid way of doing that. And it also means you can probably do your branding properly rather than have to only get the logo and not get the social media templates or not get the colors or anything like that. It means it gives you a bit more breathing space. So yeah, the things I said there. And yeah, this is a really good one actually, limiting your options, re creative talent. So there's always going to be somebody who can do your branding, absolutely. You look online, there's like, Upwork or people per hour, or even Fiverr, and if you post something on Facebook you get 1 million people coming back saying they can do it. But are they the best person for your brand? Have you seen the rest of their work? Do you like it? Have you met with them? Actually branding is the kind of thing that you don't want to be doing too often, so you want to be doing it right. So it's a good idea to have to consider who you might want for your branding and reach out to them. And yeah, also you may just end up spending on something that you're like, yeah, it'll do, because you have a presentation the next day. So it sort of puts pressures around it that means that the creative isn't as strong as it could be. So as a guide, I'd say allow 8 to 10 weeks. It can take longer, it can take less time. Most clients book when they see this because they're thinking, oh, that long? And the reason is, the bottom one here really, if you don't allow yourself time to review the options and really we actually give a week for review of concepts, because I think that the concept of your brand is, it's going to be on everything, it's going to run through everything, so to have a week is not really a big deal. But thinking about things like that, it means that you have the time to do it properly. And something I'd say is really important is try not to go to a graphic designer with a prescriptive brief of what you want it to look like. If you are a very visual person, then definitely take a mood board, take references. Always good to take brands that you like and definitely the competitors on your market. But if you share with your brand designer that the vision you have for your company, for your app, for your startup in a few years' time, that's going to be much more powerful. Then they'll talk to you about your audience, your competitors, and basically it means that you're opening up to see creative options you hadn't considered. So it can be really helpful, because what we usually do is, even if a client says, oh look, it's got to be maroon, we've always used maroon, and it's got to be an oval, it's got to be an oval, we love the oval and it houses the text perfectly. We will always give them 1, that's what they want, and 2 that aren't. 1 sort of a little bit further, and 1 complete wild card. And I'm not making it up, but they generally go for the wild card, and it always surprises me. And I think I always hear, we just couldn't visualize what it would look like until we saw it. And that's exactly the point, So use your designer well, have fun with it, and get to see a few things. And on that note, in the time that I've been thinking about this talk and tailoring it for you guys, I was thinking more and more about the discrepancy that there is between branding and agile working and the way that startups have to build. In branding, you generally define your audience, your goals, your tagline, the values you have, and you then work to those, and you create something that, when we create a brand guideline, we hope that that brand will be really faithful to it for years to come. In fact, generally when we create a brand, we tend to think 3 to 5 years. That's what we want it to last 3 to 5 years. You know, if it's a tech business, that might be towards a 3-year, and if it's a more established business, it could be far and, you know, beyond that. But it's not a process that we want you to do too often, and so we tie it down really tight. And startups are completely the opposite, obviously. So, you know, you're constantly taught to put minimum viable product out there, get feedback and improve and put it back out there and evolve and test. And I'm not sure exactly what at the moment, but I'm talking to a couple of people, and I'm going to hopefully come up with a branding solution that will work far better to help you sort of get good enough branding that you can go out and pitch to investors, but not, you know, spend too much money at that point and then consolidate it once you've gained your funding. So if anybody's interested in that, please leave me your email address or your business card, and I will inform you when it launches.